In this week's Only in America, we look beyond DACA and to the future of American politics. What is the path to power for America's future generations?
We are a movement that is focused on dismantling systemic challenges and dismantling particularly the systems that have allowed the privileged few to stay in power and not open the doors for the full diversity of Americans.
And with the DACA deadline looming, the president tells Republicans they'll have to give a little. But who's giving what to whom? And what exactly are they giving? From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. We're less than a month away from President Trump's March 5th deadline to permanently end the DACA program. Coca-Cola and a host of other big American corporations will need to make some tough decisions in the next few weeks unless Congress can reach a compromise. Coca-Cola, one of the most famous brands in the world, paid the renewal fees for DACA recipients who worked for them, about $500 each. And like many employers, Coca-Cola is now scrambling to figure out what to do if these immigrant workers are forced to leave. At this point, approximately 122 DACA recipients across the U.S. lose their protection every day. Forward.us, an immigration advocacy organization, found that nearly 300,000 DACA recipients, approximately 1,700 per business day, will be removed from the workforce between March 6th and November 6th. Let's be honest, that is a lot of people put out of a job, a lot of families without an income, and a lot of businesses wondering how they are going to replace qualified staff, unless Congress can find a solution. So, you ask, how are things in Washington, D.C.? Well, the good news is we made it through January. Problem is, February is looking to be just as hectic. The February 8th spending deadline has been simplified by Senate Democrats who seem willing to take a deal separate from DACA, but complicated by the House Freedom Caucus who wants more spending cuts and a vote on hardline immigration proposals. Meanwhile, President Trump wants a vote on his four-pillar framework he introduced last week, but he also told the Republican retreat to get it done, we'll all have to make some compromises along the way. We have to be willing to give a little. The dynamics to keep in mind. Many Republicans seem willing to trade a path to citizenship for a cut to legal immigration. Democrats, particularly after Trump's biting State of the Union address, will be hard-pressed to make any sort of concession. And there are a number of Senate Republicans, notably Rubio, Capito, and Thune, who are leaning towards a narrow solution combining protection for dreamers with border enforcement. But step back a second. The debate isn't about a path to citizenship. And with the exception of the bill introduced by Chairman Goodlatte and the President's beautiful wall, the debate isn't even about increasing immigration enforcement. Rather, the debate is being driven by far-right Republicans looking to cut legal, family-based immigration. So I guess it wasn't just about, quote, illegal immigration after all. The Evangelical Immigration Table weighed in on the debate last week in a letter that included, "We believe we should facilitate legal immigration at a level that sustains economic growth, reunites families, and protects those fleeing danger of persecution." Picking up on this angle, USA Today reported over the weekend, Republicans have come to embrace these dreamers, in part because many evangelical Christians who make up a quarter of Americans and are an influential conservative bloc within the GOP have become more vocal about the topic over the last half-decade. A judicial wrench in the gears is the lawsuit that reopened renewals for DACA recipients. The Supreme Court has fast-tracked the case for a June decision. But the case cannot provide an excuse for Congress to pump the brakes on a legislative solution, particularly since stories are now popping up of ICE detaining individuals whose DACA status has expired. One fun thing before we get to our guest. The Winter Olympics start later this weekend. American Mame Baini, a 17-year-old immigrant from Ghana, is representing the U.S. in women's speed skating, which, well, is pretty awesome. I'm Ali Noorani.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
This is Only in America. I'm Ali Noorani. Welcome to some new international listeners who joined us last week from Argentina, Australia, Brazil, and Mexico. Back here, when you look at the audience for the State of the Union, it's easy to see Congress as mostly white, old, and predominantly male, which doesn't really look like America today, much less like America as it will be. But these are the people we elect. Sayu Bhojwani wants to change that. And although she acclaims the U.S. as the world's finest democracy, here's what she said at her TED Talk as an immigrant and as a citizen.
But I don't want you to think it was a cakewalk, that America opened its arms wide and welcomed me. It's still not doing that. And I've learned a few lessons along the way that I wanted to share with you, because I think that together we can make American democracy better and stronger.
Sayu is the founder and president of New American Leaders, a national, nonpartisan organization encouraging first and second generation Americans to step into the political process and prepare them to run for office. It is hands down one of the most important organizations out there. Sayu told me that when our elected officials mirror the nation's makeup, it leads to more stable communities and a stronger democracy.
We are a movement that is focused on dismantling systemic challenges and dismantling particularly the systems that have allowed the privileged few to stay in power and not open the doors for the full diversity of Americans. The work that we do is specifically...
So go back to when you had the idea, because
Sure.
I mean, I think it's I remember the conversations like in 2012, 2013 when you started thinking about this and saw the opportunity, not the opportunity, but the need.
Yeah, well, actually, you were very much part of the genesis of the organization because you may remember that you were chairing a meeting of immigrant rights advocates in 2008, in the summer of 2008, and we were all thinking about what Congress and the new administration was going to look like and what the struggle for CIR was going to look like. And what I felt at that moment is, frankly, that we meaning the immigrant rights advocates and the immigrant community, are always blaming ourselves for not getting this done. We're always thinking about, well, if we did feel differently, or if we approached that person, or if we spent more on messaging, and that in fact the problem was not us, but who we were talking to. And that in order to have a debate about immigration that reflected the real concerns of our communities, we needed to have members of our community in Congress. But that wasn't going to happen overnight, and as you know, more than 50% of people in Congress have been state or local legislators before. And so as I thought more about this idea, what I thought about is how could we build a pipeline at the state and local level who could address the concerns that immigrants and refugees were facing today, and then build a pipeline to Congress for tomorrow. And then, because it's a new idea, and we were in the throes of getting a new administration in, and the fiscal crisis happened in 2008, I held off a little bit until 2010, when Arizona's infamous SB 1070 was passed. And then I thought, this is the time, because we're really seeing a continued backlash from the state government. And so we started this organization. Let me tell you a little bit about exactly what we do. We work to recruit local leaders who are already demonstrating a commitment to immigrant communities and work with them to prepare them to run for office. And then people say, well, immigrants don't vote, and can immigrants get elected to office? And obviously, not everybody we train, but everybody who runs has to be a citizen of the U.S. In order to run. But they're actually very, very well positioned to be the leaders that we've been waiting for, because they have connections to communities. They've already been doing voter mobilization, voter outreach. They know what the issues are. And the idea is that they take all of that into government and are much more responsive and representative of the communities that they're serving.
Give me an example of kind of somebody who will approach the organization, and what are the types of programs and the trainings that you provide? Because I think a lot of us think that you running for office is easy, and obviously it's nothing close to easy. So how do you help somebody grapple with that, particularly if they became a citizen 5 years ago?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll stick with Arizona because that's a state that we've worked in for many years. And last year, 4 of our alum won elected office in Arizona, 3 of them to state legislature, 1 of them to a school board. And the person who won office at the school board level actually was voting for the first time. She had just become a citizen, and she voted for the first time in the same election in which she got elected to the school board. And so that's kind of the full continuum of engagement.
Pretty high bar for future elections.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a couple of other people like that who were not our alum, but one of the folks who won a seat on the state legislature had been an organizer for Unite Here. She had worked in a number of community organizations. She had been a student organizer when she was in college. And when she made the decision to run, there was a vacancy. So it's kind of a longish story, but I'll give you the short version of the story.
It's a podcast. We can talk for days.
Yeah, well, the short version of the story, though, it's kind of a wonky thing. I think what people think about often is that you have to have some special set of skills to run for office. We think that they're smarter than we are, that they have more connections than we do, that they have deeper pockets than we do, and certainly that's the case with many people. But in Arizona, for example, there is a public financing system. And so Athena Salman, who's the person I'm talking about, who was an organizer, ran using the public financing system. And she and another one of our alum, Isela Blanc, ran on the same slate for the same district, because Arizona has multi-member districts. So both of them went out and registered voters and engaged in a lot of voter contact in order to raise the $5 contributions that they had to get from residents. And so they set up their base that way, and then went in, after that first batch of matching donations, after they met their first requirement, they were then able to get public financing, and so they didn't have to focus on fundraising. All they had to do was focus on voter mobilization. And the 2 of them won. They actually unseated a Democratic incumbent who they felt was not representing the district. And so that's an example of 2 people who are community-oriented, who had been doing community work, who did not have deep pockets, who really learned how to win an election through our program, and are now really trying to bring a different conversation to the Arizona State Legislature than was happening before.
So then, what does that different conversation look like?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. Isela, for example, was undocumented until IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. So she was undocumented throughout high school. So as a state legislature in Arizona, she's able to bring that perspective that, as you know, Arizona has one of the highest populations of undocumented young people in the country. And she's able to talk about those issues. In Arizona, because it's a Republican-controlled legislature, it's hard to really move major progressive policy on immigrants or anything else for that matter. But bringing the conversation to the table makes a difference. Athena has been pushing the legislature to look at things like religious belief, for example, and thinking about that in a more expanded way. And so, at the moment, their ability to really create policy change is very difficult. But what they have been doing is kind of setting the example that people like them can serve in the legislature. And next year, we have, it's 8 and counting alum who are going to be running for Arizona State Legislature.
Really? Wow.
We have an alum running for the Attorney General's seat in Arizona. And so even when we are not able to create sweeping policy change, which frankly is very hard to do if you're an individual, we are contributing, our alum are contributing to an ecosystem of civic conversation and inclusive conversation. And then as that grows, and one of the reasons we invest deeply in a local community is because it takes time. And so, maybe next year or 2019 we'll have 6 or 8 legislators who abide by the values of being authentic and inclusive and accountable. And then those numbers will grow, and then maybe some of them will run for Congress, and then Arizona will have people at all levels who are fighting on behalf of a more diverse state.
And so as alum, participants are going through the program, they graduate, and then they get into office, and they're starting to advance policy. How do you think that they are then changing the perspective of that incumbent Republican, state representative in Arizona. Do they come back to you with stories of, I can't believe, they said that, or do they come back to stories with, I feel like I'm starting to change perspectives?
I think it's both. I mean, the reality is that when people like us start to claim power, it threatens some people. On the other hand, I think it also, when you're serving side by side with a legislator who maybe has never had a personal conversation with someone of a different background, whether that's a party affiliation or an ethnic identity, there is a way that people connect just person to person, and that sets the stage for more in-depth conversations. And I'll say that, one of the reasons that we created an organization that is New American Leaders, that is inclusive of people of all ethnic backgrounds and shared immigrant and refugee stories, is for that reason, that we have these shared values and shared experiences, and that to the extent that we can create a conversation that is inclusive rather than exclusive, we, I think, are going to be able to move the needle further on policy conversations. So they're getting both. Then, and I think we spend time, one of the things that I haven't talked about is the work that we do with people once they're elected to ensure that we don't lose them to the system or from the system. And that's very hard. But governance is something that we, again, assume that people are going to just do once they get elected. And we don't invest in their leadership and in helping them navigate these, whether they're a minority because of party affiliation or a minority because of ethnic identity. That's a rich set of conversations that we're having with people once they're in office. One of the things that we talk about is, how do you measure success? And sometimes success is not passing the bill. Sometimes success is just introducing the bill. Sometimes success is just having the conversation with someone who you thought was the polar opposite of you on an issue. Sometimes success is setting the stage for the person who's going to come after you and move conversation forward.
So how many, give me a sense of the number of new Americans at the state, at the different levels of government, and just what the data looks like now. But then, how do you see this unfolding over the next 10 years? What's your ambitious goal for the next 10 years in terms of really diversifying the ranks of policymakers?
So if we talk specifically about Asian American and Latino communities, which, as we know, are the largest immigrant groups, that only 2% of the 500,000 state and local offices are held by Asian Americans and Latinos. So the ambitious goal is to get to 23 or 25% as the population grows. I think that's going to take another 20 years to get to parity. And the reason it's going to take that long is because the challenges are mostly systemic. It's not that individuals don't want to run, but we have, I'm just going to mention three. One is, the biggest, I think, are gatekeepers and the decision makers around who actually has a platform, who's going to get support from whether it's the party or the unions, frankly. There's the union as a movement, and then there's the union as leadership, and they make very strategic decisions, sometimes to support the incumbent because they don't want to challenge or rock the boat. So gatekeepers are a big issue. They're very invested in who is currently in power, no matter how bad they might be, because it's a devil we know. The second is money, obviously, and it's not just the cost of campaigns. People talk a lot about the cost of campaigns, but it's much deeper than that. It's that you're a first-generation college student, you have loans to pay off. What kind of job can you have that will allow you to go to the Capitol for 100 days a year? Or if you're in Texas, every 18 months you have to spend 6 months in the Capitol.
Or much less have the time to run for office to begin with.
Well, exactly. And so those things, before you even get to how much a campaign costs, and then there's cost of campaigns, right? And can we institute more public financing jurisdictions? Can we create more opportunities to make campaigns less dependent on big dollar donations? So gatekeepers and money. And then the third thing, and that, we do talk a lot about money in our training, but we spend a lot of time talking about what the third barrier is, which is this psychological barrier that immigrants are often seen as takers and not makers. Immigrants are often seen as threats, as foreigners, and not as Americans. And when you close your eyes and you think about who an American leader is, it's usually not a petite brown woman who moved here from Mexico or India. And so we have internalized that notion of who's a leader. And so breaking down those psychological barriers takes time. But the more of us we see in office, the more likely we are to embrace our own possibilities.
I mean, I think that New American Leaders is one of the most important organizations out there, because, I mean, the way I've been thinking about this is that as immigrants come to the U.S., their identity changes from being, Latino to American back to Latino. So it's always fluid. Then people over time integrate to become citizens. But then ultimately, when immigrants become new Americans and they're influencing the system, that's the full realization, I think, of the American dream is, you're influencing the system as a voter, as a candidate, as a legislator,
and a donor.
Right.
I mean, fundamentally, we're about expanding the electorate and growing the number of participants in our democracy, because our democracy is going to be as strong as the number of people who are participating. And then, no matter how much economic power we have, if we don't have decision-making power, we're really going to be shut out from one aspect of being a full American.
So what gives you hope?
The people who are running, the fact that there are people who are voting for the first time and running for office, the fact that these stories from our legislators, I'll just share this thing in closing. We did a meeting of elected officials in November, and we did a circle in which everybody shared their experience of any kind of discrimination. And these are people who are in office, who have had doors slammed on them, etc. And every single one of them said, when they heard everybody else's story, that it made them feel more hopeful, because it made them feel that their experience was not unique and that they weren't they weren't isolated in having those experiences. And instead of feeling discouraged by hearing story after story after story, they felt hopeful that we were united in our desire to serve America and to be, I think of us as being the most Americans ever, because we've learned it from the book, and so that gives me hope.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. Sayu Bhojwani is the founder and president of New American Leaders. Check out immigrationforum.org for more information on Sayu and her organization. And while you're there, leave some thoughts about the show. That's all for now. Only in America comes to you each week from the National Immigration Forum in Washington, D.C. Thanks, as always, to producers Emily Chow, Megan Wetmore, and executive producer Kathleen Farrell. I'm Ali Noorani. See you next week.